Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Richard Moglen, and welcome back to your Stock Market Outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. Definitely a lot to talk about, even after a shortened trading week, and we've had definitely a little bit of a character change in the market, considering the action in growth stocks and the market indexes. So a lot to talk about in this video. We'll cover the market indexes, the leading stocks in the market, my watch list, and how it performed this past week. Then we'll move on to a few different sources of sentiment, including my Twitter surveys, the put call ratio, the name exposure index. I'll move on to the IBD big picture article, and finally the GMI signal from richardlmoglen.com. I'll put all those different sources of information together at the end and give you my take on the general market conditions. But starting with the general market indexes, let's start with the NASDAQ composite. Definitely a little bit of a character change. As I mentioned here, we had a downside reversal, bearish outside day on the 22nd. This is where I let go of most of the remaining positions I had, and feedback overall on my trading during these last few days during the uptrend just wasn't that great, and that kind of made me a little bit cautious, especially considering how extended we were historically from that 50-day moving average. After this downside reversal, we tried to find support at the 21 EMA, this purple line here, which is kind of my go-to key moving averages to determine the trend and health of the market. So when we're trending above that 21 EMA, that's when I make a lot of progress, and trading is kind of an easy dollar environment. But when we're below it and chopping and being very volatile, that's when conditions kind of change, and it's a lot harder to make progress, especially after we're 5-6 weeks from that key spot near the fall through day. So overall, we lost that key moving average, the 21 EMA, on this day, the 26th, and finished pretty much at the lows. So not great price action. It is on lower volume. Obviously, it was a holiday week, but we'll have to see whether we find support at this prior level, the top of this base here, or if we fall all the way to the 50-day moving average, which I think would be a logical spot for maybe the start of a consolidation and then potentially a move back up and an additional trend. So that is the NASDAQ. The S&P 500 looks pretty similar. Bring it up that chart right here. Yeah, that same downside reversal. Very negative price action on the 26th. Obviously, we've got the news of the new COVID variant coming out, but I think you don't really have to focus too much on the macro events. Just watch the price action of the indexes, the leading stocks. Those will tell you everything you need to know about the market environment. But once again, we've got kind of some confluence here with the top of this prior base as well as the 50-day SMA. So if we continue to see some weakness here, I think this would be a logical spot for the potential start of a bottoming process. But once again, this is just an area of interest. It could slice through it. It could bounce before then. It's just a spot that I'm currently watching. Looking at the IWM small caps, let's bring that up as well. We saw overall a failed breakout from this base, which is not a good sign. And once again, we're below all the key moving averages on this index. So a lot of work to do, especially in the small caps. And the best environment is when the small caps, large caps are all basically rallying together. That's when the easy dollars are made. Looking at IWO, which is basically the small cap growth, this looks pretty similar, although even more negative than the IWM. So once again, reason to be cautious below all the key moving averages. Next up, I'd like to take a look at the FFTY, the Innovator IBD50 ETF. And you can see we're really volatile here, very negative price action on that 22nd. And once again, we're below a declining 21 and 50 SMA, although holding that 200-day moving average. So this looks like a failed breakout at the moment, and it remains to be seen whether we form up a consolidation, go sideways for a few days, and then rally, or we break that 200-day moving average, which would definitely be a negative sign for the market. However, there are some stocks holding up reasonably well above their 21 EMAs. Roblox is a key focus for me here. Basically, you can see some profit taking on this day, bearish outside day, but it is holding up above even the 10-day moving average and is staying above that base pivot. So I would like to see it actually go sideways, let that 21 EMA catch up to price and kind of act as support. And then if you can form out a range here above that level and then move off of it as the general market rebounds, I think that would be a great spot to enter this potential leader. Just look at the volume coming in to the stock. This should be the tip off that you want to stay focused on this potential true market leader. Unity Software is in a similar space here. It's holding that 21 EMA pretty nicely after a nice breakout from a long-term base, and is acting reasonably well, holding that 10-week moving average on a closing basis. So that is a key level as well. And other than that, there are some names that have kind of rallied a little bit. AFRM is below the key moving averages, but did show some RS late last week. Let's see, what is another one that's actually broken down ABNB, definitely a character change here. Looking at the chart, it's broken the 21 EMA and the low of the gap up. And right now it just looks like it's forming out either another base or on a longer term time frame, a larger cup with handle. And many of the leaders that I'll go through today kind of look like this. And definitely you want to be focused more on the stocks that look like a Roblox, Unity Software, or TTD, where they're holding their base pivots, they're above their 21 EMAs, and they're just overall holding up better and showing relative strength versus the market. And if they are declining, they're declining on below average volume for the most part. So definitely some stocks to focus on. PUBM is another one with a potential character change. Highest volume ever here recently, and now just going quiet and tight against a 200-day moving average, forming a nice flag right below these levels. So those are a few leaders to go over, and now let's move on to TT2000 and go through a bunch more charts. All right, so here is actually kind of my relative strength focus list here that I've went through a bunch of these already, but let's go through the other ones. MRAM, another highest volume ever recently, going quiet and tight. And this is also a potential power play moving up over 100%. And you can see it's only pulled back about 20% or so and showing nice RS versus the market recently. MTTR, also a nice overall shape. Definitely volatile, wide ranges here, but it is holding up above the 10-day moving average and the 21 EMA. This is a very fast mover, so keep that in mind. ONON is also one that I like the overall shape, and it's holding above the rising 21 EMA. So at this point, if you can sort by the weekly change, short by what stocks are making relative strength new highs, what stocks are above a rising 21 EMA, those are excellent screens to kind of try to find those stocks that are kind of bucking the overall trend of the market and showing relative strength. And with those covered, let's go ahead and go through the rest of the true market leaders, potential true market leaders list here. And many of these did get hit pretty hard. Some are down 10, 20% even. So most likely I'll be doing some pruning this weekend. And let me know anything you think I should add to this list. Just leave a comment down below. Going through our charts, let's start with AFRM, held up reasonably well. Did slice through the 50-day SMA, and it hasn't acted too well since the earnings report here. But it's holding up decently well. It's showing RS, especially these past 3 days. You can see that in the relative strength line as well. And it remains to be seen whether this needs a longer term base or if it'll just burst through all the key moving averages. But overall showing RS, especially late last week, although these updates are on below average volume. UPST, you can see, is finding support near the confluence of the 200-day area and the prior pivot. So we'll have to see whether this is the bottom of the base. Most likely this will need a lot of time after this earnings gap down on heavy volume, but still one to watch, and we'll see what happens next week. Netflix holding up reasonably well, and mega caps did show definitely some RS last week above the 21 EMA, although not a great close to end out last Friday. AMD showing a lot of strength above the 10-day moving average. Anything above a rising 10 and 21 EMA is definitely showing relative strength in my book. And this chart looks pretty strong, although not necessarily viable unless you entered on the 2-2 reversal here on Wednesday, or even on the upside reversal here on the 23rd. Next up, we've got Lucid. I definitely like how this chart is shaping up here. Really tight the past few days, and you actually had an oops reversal on this Friday, holding above all the key moving averages. Next up, we've got Bros, and this is also holding up and pretty tight here above 50. Definitely actionable through this prior week's high if the overall market recovers next week, but I would like to see it burst through all these key moving averages and get back through these pivots around 60. TDD also holding up really well, definitely on my focus list here, holding above this prior pivot as well as the 100 level late last week. SC finding support near the 200-day moving average, but looks a little bit like the left side of the base to me, so it would kind of be unnatural if this just recovers and goes back to all-time highs. I think this will need a little bit of time before it's ready to go on another sustained uptrend. Looking at skin, this is still going quiet and tight above all the moving averages, definitely actionable through these pivots next week, as well as a reversal off the 50-day moving averages. Net recovered nicely into the end of the week, but also this is on declining volume and there's a little bit of a character change. And I would expect this to kind of let the 50-day moving average catch up to price before it continues this move. MTDR, not great action here below the 50-day moving average on high volume, and not a great closing range on Friday either, back below these moving averages as well. NVIDIA holding up really nicely, definitely showing relative strength above the 10-day moving average and 21 EMA. although you do have a pretty bad downside reversal here on this Monday, so it might just need a little bit of time before it's ready to make another run towards 400. DDOG also above the key moving averages, the 21 EMA, although the 10-day is declining, and this is really the day where you want to get stopped out below this range. Moving on, we've got in mode, and this is below the 50-day, just barely, not yet living below it, but this hasn't had an extended base in quite a while, so keep an eye out for that, and definitely you want to be stopped out if it breaks under 79.8, which is the low of this, as well as an early stop might be just below 80. Next up, we've got Bill.com, and it is holding the 50-day moving average, but below these key moving averages, and it is holding the 300 level at this moment. Perry, really bad reversal, downside reversal here. You want to be most likely stopped out on this day after it confirms this failed breakout, but it is finding support near the 50-day moving average. Tesla holding up reasonably well. Looks like a little bit the start of a flat base potentially, or a similar base to back in these areas, so it can be very volatile. But I'll be watching this one carefully to see if there's some inside weeks and up setups. And it did get pretty tight on this Friday on below average volume. Unity also holding that 21 EMA and the top of this prior base here. Definitely high up on my focus list, even though you do see some distribution on these 3 days. EMPH going sideways above a 21 EMA, holding up really nicely relative to the rest of the market and the growth space, although you do have a downside reversal on this Monday. HUT pulling back on below average volume to the 50-day moving average. I think a push through these moving averages would be actionable for sure. You can see it did pull back below this overall base pivot, but it is holding this level near 11.25. CrowdStrike doesn't look great at all. This really needs time. You can see it's kind of changed character here, gotten really wide and loose, especially in this last base even compared to the prior run in 2020. Task also pulling back below all the key moving averages, not much to say. Not really actionable at this time. ZS holding near the 21 EMA, but you do have a little bit of a character change on this day. On the Monday, the decline on high volume with a poor closing range, and you had a little bit of stalling action on high volume on this Friday, the day before. Team, not really actionable below all the key moving averages. Airbnb, definitely a character change and an expectation breaker as it lost this earnings gap up below, and even as it had the downside reversal failed breakout here on this Wednesday. I actually tried it on this day, and it got stopped out on this day right here, pretty much at break even. SI holding up above the 21 EMA. This looks pretty good, especially on a weekly chart, although you do have a bearish overall candle here. It remains to be seen whether this kind of just goes sideways for another inside week and then pushes out. But overall, I think it is a positive as holding above these key moving averages. LC pulling back into the 50-day moving average, but below these ones right here. Coinbase pulling back into an area of confluence here with this prior base pivot, as well as the 50-day moving average. So if you like this type of setup, definitely one to focus on next week. And I really like the overall weekly chart on this one, although you do have a poor closing range. I definitely want to see maybe an inside week and then an inside weekend up to start another potential move towards prior all-time highs. Moving on, we've got App, which also is pulling back into the 50-day moving average. Definitely a character change on this day right here on the 15th, breaking the inside day to the downside and not following through with this breakout. Moving on, we've got AMBA, which also had a character change on this day right here, the 10th, and also on this day breaking the low of this range. And now it's below the 50-day moving average, although not yet kind of living below that key level. Looking at Mara, also a negative character change, failed breakout on this day and falling through to the downside on this day right here, the 15th, on very high volume, but it is getting tight near the 50-day moving average, but watch out for a break of this low right here. AEHR, below all the key moving averages, looks like it's starting a potential base. SPT also looks like it needs a new base. You have a failed breakout here on this downside reversal, 1119, and bad fall through, breaking all these lows in one bar on the 22nd. Dash also looks like it just needs a base. A very sharp decline to the 200-day moving average, and in my opinion, this needs a lot of time. SS well showing a negative character change, looks like the left side of a base. DOCN, similar character change on this day right here, and you can see how in one day you can give back a whole, basically months progress here. So you got to be quick, and most likely you had your stop here at this low after it reconfirmed on this day. Asana also with a very bad bar here, taking out basically 2 months of work here. And that's why you got to be quick and make sure your stops are updated going into each and every single day. So overall, that is a run through of the potential true market leaders list. I'll definitely be trimming a lot of these, and many of them need an entire new base before I would consider entering them. And let me know if there are any stocks I should add to this list going into next week. Next up, let's take a look at my focus list. And if we didn't cover the chart already, we'll go through the chart as well. A, B, and B we already talked about. BitF also pulling back on declining volume. And also pulling back into the confluence of this prior pivot. So if you get a retake of that level, this could be actionable for sure. But also this is highly correlated with a lot of cryptocurrencies, so keep that in mind. Burrow's already covered, coin the same. LTHM, nice upside reversal on this Friday after the gap down, but a little bit of a character change, especially with this downside reversal on Monday. And looks like it needs a little bit more of a consolidation here to retake this range and set up for another run towards all-time highs. MP still looks definitely actionable through these levels. You got a DTL at this moment right here as it flags out up the right-hand side of this prior base. NEWR, I was watching for a breakout to the upside from this tightness. We got a breakout to the downside. This is still potentially actionable because it is holding the 21 EMA, but this day right here gives me a lot of pause and suggests there wasn't really a lot of conviction in the buyers. And you also saw evidence of that back here on the failed breakout on the 17th. PUBM, I really like the look of this chart. You had the highest volume ever, kind of resetting the chart here after it gapped up on earnings. You didn't have a great closing range, which does give me a little bit of pause, but I like how it's acted, pretty much going sideways during the market pullback. SCDG failed breakout to the upside on Monday. I actually tried this, got stopped out flat, and it's still potentially actionable up the right-hand side of the space, but like with a lot of charts, you've got this kind of warning sign that there's not a lot of conviction with the buyers. So overall, that's pretty much a run through my focus list. Make sure you guys tune in tomorrow when I'll be posting my next list of ideas. All right, so moving on to sentiment, let's start with my Twitter surveys. Last week, we were at 37% bullish. Now we're at 34.7%, so a little bit historically low for sure, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to pull back in the general market. Looking at the name exposure index, this has been a little bit of a warning sign the past few weeks, especially when you had a 0 in the bearish column here and the overall number over 100. And looking at the bulls versus bears poll, you can see we're back near 60, so a lot of room to pull back to 40 here. And looking at the put call ratio, we've seen a very sharp increase, which is good. There's some fear coming into the market, but we definitely want to see it stay here for a few different sessions. So overall, in terms of sentiment, we are seeing a little bit of fear, especially in this metric. But overall, in the name exposure index, this is still pretty high, and I'll be really interested to see what this reading is next week. Moving on to the IBD Big Picture article, the headline is COVID-19 Fears Reemerge, Slam Stocks, 3 Key Sell Signals to Heed Today. Reading through the article, they discuss a new variant from South Africa a little bit, the action in the market indexes on this past Friday, which was not great. And they also discuss how we got a 5th distribution day, which is quite a bit. So we're getting up there on that reading as well. And also they have the chart of the failed breakout on the IWM, 3 key sell rules in stocks, to talk about cutting losses, all of that. And they also have a chart of BNTX, which of course rallied on the news of the new COVID variant. So overall, their take is a confirmed uptrend, 2 distribution days on the NASDAQ, 4 on the S&P 500. Lastly, we've got the Wishing Well GMI signal, which is still green since October 15th. And we had a score of 5 out of 6 on this past Thursday. So I do believe that this did take a hit on Friday, this metric, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this back near 3 or 4 going into early next week. So overall, taking everything into account, my current view is an uptrend under pressure. Definitely over the past few days, you should have been taking some profits and cutting losses quickly here if you're more of a swing position trader. But if you're an investor, obviously your time horizon is a little bit further down the road. So overall, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. I'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.